If you were on trial for murder,
Yeah.
who would you rather have on your jury? An ex-cop or a true crime podcast fan?
God, a true crime podcaster, I think. Like, yeah, I mean, for sure, right? Like, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, they're both. I guess it depends on the cop. I mean, like they make.
Well, it does depend on the cop. Welcome to 1999, the podcast. I am John Brooks.
And I'm Julia Sermons.
And today we're doing something a little different, taking a look at two movies, starting with the 94th highest grossing movie of the year, just beating out recent entry Muppets from Space, opening March 19th and going on to gross just shy of $17 million. On a budget of $50 million. Directed by Clint Eastwood, adapted from the novel by Andrew Klavan, with a screenplay by Larry Gross, Paul Brickman, and Stephen Schiff, with a score by frequent Eastwood collaborator, the late Lenny Niehaus. Starring Clint Eastwood, Isaiah Washington, Lisa Gay Hamilton, James Woods, Dennis Leary, Bernard Hill, Michael McKean, the late, great Michael Jeter, Eric Dokes from Dexter King as Pussy Man, and Mary McCormick. Today, we are talking first about true crime.
What do you think of Beecham?
Well, sometimes I think about the girl he shot dead over $96. Mostly I think about doing my job.
Well, 12 hours from now, convicted killer Frank Beecham will be executed by lethal injection.
Healthy as a horse.
All I'm looking for here is the human interest angle, you know, final date, what it's like, right?
Put Everett on it.
To set everything with Everett is a big investigative witch hunt.
Hey, he was a drunk then, he isn't now. Everett, come here.
I want to tell everyone that I believe in Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. I believe I'm going to a better place, better justice there. Is there any more that you want?
Mr. Beecham, frankly, I don't give a rat's ass about Jesus Christ, and I don't care about justice in this world or the next. So I gotta ask you, did you kill that woman or not?
Read the transcripts. A witness saw Beecham with a gun.
I think I will feel a whole lot safer when Frank Beecham's gone.
Was there something here before?
Yes, sir. That's where the potato chips used to be.
How could you have seen over the potato chips?
What potato chips?
This is a white accountant in Richmond. Telling me he's just gonna walk into a grocery store when he heard the shots.
You're the guy who led that crusade to get the rapist released last year, aren't you?
Alan, they're gonna kill the guy tonight.
Can we come back tomorrow?
After a police investigation, a trial, 6 years of appeals, and you found discrepancies?
Now, come on, there was somebody, wasn't there? Give me something.
Man, what do you want from me? What do you people want from me?
Anybody ever tell you that Beecham volunteered for a lie detector test? And he flunked it big time. So why don't you just go pour yourself a tall one and think about that?
Goodbye, Daddy.
I don't know whose head you're trying to save here. Beecham's are your own.
From Academy Award-winning director Clint Eastwood.
Brother Beecham, let me tell you of the law.
True crime.
So, Julia, what is true crime about?
So Steve Everett, played by Clint Eastwood, is a washed-up journalist with a serious drinking problem and an even bigger problem keeping it in his pants. He's barely holding on to his job at an Oakland newspaper when he gets a lucky break when a colleague dies in a car accident. Ev inherits the dead reporter's assignment. He's supposed to be writing an interest piece about Frank Beecham, played by Isaiah Washington, a man scheduled to be executed that very evening for murdering a pregnant convenience store clerk 6 years ago. Steve is supposed to just phone it in, but his reporter instincts kick in and he senses that there's something wrong with the case. Ev starts pulling at the threads, much to the annoyance of basically everyone. His editor, played by James Woods, his long-suffering wife, played by Diane Benora, and the witness who testified against Frank. As the clock ticks down to Frank's execution, Ev races around trying to find evidence that will exonerate him. With only hours left, Ev finally uncovers the truth. The real killer is a young white man. A key witness who identified Frank as the shooter has been lying all along. In a nail-biting climax, Ev gets the evidence to the governor literally seconds before Frank is executed. Frank is released, and Ev gets to feel like a real journalist again.
True Crime was largely forgotten and remains overlooked, most likely due to its release, at which what can be described as Eastwood's most prolonged artistic lull in the mid-1990s, starting with 1997's Absolute Power and Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, 2000's Space Cowboys, and 2002's Bloodwork. That lull would end with 2003's acclaimed Mystic River, which earned Oscars for both Sean Penn and Tim Robbins, as well as Best Director and Best Picture nominations for Eastwood. True Crime holds a Rotten Tomatoes score of 58 and a Metacritic score of 64, with strong reviews from the likes of the Chicago Tribune's Michael Wilmington, who called it, quote, an old-fashioned movie done with wit, grace, smarts, and style, and the New York Times' Janet Maslin, who concludes, quote, as sharply written by Larry Gross, Paul Brickman, and Stephen Schiff from a mystery novel by Andrew Klavan, True Crime is as directed by Eastwood with righteous indignation and increasingly strong momentum. As in a perfect world, his direction is galvanized by a sense of second chances and tragic misunderstandings, and by contrasting a larger sense of justice with the peculiar minutiae of crime. Perhaps he goes a shade too far in the latter direction, though. A1 steak sauce and potato chips play much more significant roles in the convenience store killing than anyone might expect. But many of the reviews are middling, like that of Wesley Morris in the San Francisco Examiner, who said the film, quote, plays like a lost Rockford file. And finally, in a negative review, the Toronto Globe and Mail's Rick Groen wrote, quote, on the whole, the film is content to lumber awkwardly between the condemned man on death row and the intrepid reporter on his save-a-life beat. There's about as much rhythm in the style as there is a sense in the plot. But in a twist straight out of The Sixth Sense, we are also going to look at another Clint Eastwood film that examines the inadequacies of the criminal justice system, released 25 years later. 2024's Juror number 2, which reunites About a Boy stars Nicholas Hoult and Toni Collette, alongside Zoe Deutsch, Leslie Bibb, Cedric Yarbrough, Amy Aquino, Gabriel Bassin, and J.K. Simmons. Julia, who is joining us to do all of that?
Joining us today, we have Aaron from the wonderful essential podcast Hit Factory, which is more ambitious than our podcast because it covers absolutely all of the 1990s.
Mm-hmm.
So welcome, Aaron. Is there anything else our listeners should know about you?
Hello. Thank you all for having me. Very happy to be here. And no, I think you covered everything, Julia. I would not say our podcast is more ambitious than a podcast dedicated to the year 1999 specifically, only because we made that decision so that we wouldn't lose our minds having to go through a very set and finite period of the decade or a specific list of titles. We really do get to cover just about anything we feel like week to week. So it really is just so that we don't have to do the academic and very thoughtful work of a podcast like yours doing the deep research. Because we can also say, in that sense that like, because we go all over the place, we got to work a little faster. So we don't do as much of the research, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's my excuse anyway for why I get to rest on my laurels and be a little lazy on our podcast. Is it's not so academic because we just made the decision about what we were covering yesterday, and not anything to do with my own laziness or lack of foresight and pre-planning.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as like, well, as you know, this year in particular is loaded with diversity, and it's never really a year where we're stuck in sort of like a rut. It doesn't feel like, but I started this 3.5 years ago, and there's still some like very high profile movies that we haven't covered ever. So, and this is one I've been like really wanting to do for a long time, because I like these ones that are kind of forgotten, that are by these very well-known auteurs, and are kind of like, a bit of a mixed bag. But what's your obsession with 90s cinema specifically, Aaron?
I mean, I think it it's in the name of the podcast, right? It was just sort of a veritable hit factory, whether it was in the United States or really elsewhere in many of the national cinemas abroad all over the world. It was just one of those really unique times, I think, too, in our sort of ever evolving late capitalist, can I say hellscape? I don't know. I guess
You can say
hellscape is the
hellscape.
right word.
It's a hellscape.
Where, I think America had sort of bought into this idea of the end of history, its own prosperity, it's sort of like economic and social and moral fortitude. And with that came, I think, a lot of money being spent very frivolously in ways that allowed artists to really express themselves. And also, I think, elicited a certain kind of ennui in a lot of artists who were like, is this really all there is? And so there is a lot of tension in the decade with people sort of mining the potential of the art form and of, the last real moment, I think, especially in the Hollywood studio system, where you could get away with making these really ambitious projects with a really decent budget behind them and noteworthy movie stars and like real money being pumped into this project, and find these traces of things that antagonize, I think, the status quo and really challenge sort of perceptions that are held broadly speaking. So I guess that's a little bit US centric in the way I talk about it, but also, I mean, the independent scene of the period too just was really exploding with Sundance and what have you. So movie after movie after movie, and some of my favorite things that we discover are certainly like things that are just now, 25, 30 years later, finding restorations because of cinephiles and people who have a lot of dedication to the craft and the art form outside of America. And also things that, just exist on VHS tapes that have been digitized, or some like single DVD release from 1997 or 98 that have just sort of floated around in the back channels of digital ephemera. So it's such a broad and kind of wide net we cast, and it's always rewarding, really, no matter what level of movie you're dealing with.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what you just said there, like, really comes to a kind of, I don't know, nexus point in 1999. A lot of that stuff kind of collapses onto itself, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's such a fascinating year, is that, like, it both feels like the end of something and the beginning of something, and a lot of the films of that period, like, of that year, really do kind of, present that. And what you said about independent film as well, like, I think a lot of people who didn't really kind of live through it don't realize that, like, Pulp Fiction really did change the whole marketplace of independent cinema, because it was the first movie that really, in any meaningful, like, cultural zeitgeist kind of way, like, broke through and introduced teenagers to the idea of seeing independent cinema and, like, going to art house theaters. At least that was in my experience, for sure. Like, everybody that I knew who started getting into indie movies, it was via Pulp Fiction. And so 94 being a huge year as far as all that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tarantino, for all his sins, did kind of open up a world of discovery for a lot of people. Alongside some of those Sundance darlings, like I think of Linklater too, and in that sort of canon of American filmmakers. But it was, as I said, it's just a smorgasbord of incredible movies, and really, I go back and we revisit these things that you think and understand and remember well, and find really interesting textures and wrinkles in them that maybe you weren't anticipating or expecting.
Can I ask you both then to start about your relationship to Clint Eastwood as a creative figure in film? Whether that goes back to his, Sergio Leone days, or as a director or whatever. Julia, you as well. Like, what's your, where does Clint Eastwood live in your cinematic love life?
So I think I was first introduced to Eastwood like from watching films like that it at their time of release, like Midnight in the Garden of Evil and Absolute Power and stuff, and just sort of enjoying those movies without. I mean, obviously Eastwood is in Absolute Power, but
Yeah.
not really thinking about them as like Clint Eastwood. And then I went to college and I took this class on masculinity in film,
Mhm.
which was like A plus to this professor who just made a class around men she was horny for. So so she just they were just about these. Part of the class was about Marcello Mastroianni, part was about Clint Eastwood, and part was about Harvey Keitel. Uh, and so I think we watched Play Misty for Me and The Beguiled, and I just like uh, I remember just having a feeling of like this guy just thinks every woman in the world wants to sleep with him. And just like it like not hitting me the right way with that. And
Yeah.
so I've gone I when I really got into spaghetti westerns, I really grew to appreciate them more. And something like the Outlaw Josie Wales, which is just like a meticulously made perfect film. You know,
Mhm.
he's a director of great talent. But I haven't I've probably seen about half of them, I would say, of the ones he's directed. Um and I do uh so sort of like the big ones that kind of break into the discourse I've seen, and the ones that kind of didn't pass with that less comment I haven't seen. So um I don't um I mostly don't um his politics are there and they're what they are.
They're also confusing, but yeah, they're
Yeah,
not right.
and in this movie especially so, right?
Yeah.
But so it's not like I'm put off by him for that reason. It's just sort of there's sort of always been something else to watch when I'm trying to catch up on the old ones.
Yeah. So I like to tell people that I came to Clint Eastwood because of Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns when I was a
Mhm.
teenager, but I actually recalled after some soul searching and some revisiting of his work that, in fact, the very first thing I believe I saw Clint Eastwood in was his 2000 film Space Cowboys, which I saw in theaters with my mom and dad. And that was my
Holy shit.
introduction to him at the time. I, for whatever reason, had a good deal of fondness for that movie as like an 11-year-old boy, watching these old guys. Like, I liked space movies, I guess. I was a big fan of Apollo 13 and stuff like that. So,
Yeah.
it doesn't quite deliver on that front now watching it in 2025, I will say, but it was good enough for the time. But yeah, I mean, the first time I really like took notice of and tried to kind of contend with what Clint Eastwood was as a cultural figure was in checking out those Sergio Leone spaghetti westerns. There's no real impetus for it. I simply worked at Best Buy in high school and had a 50% discount on their media section and would buy all the new DVDs. And so there was a Sergio Leone Western collection that had been released that I purchased on the cheap and watched it and was instantly taken with this totemic, scowling, no named figure in all of these movies, and he was just the ultimate sort of representation of cool to me as like a
Mm.
16, 17 year old. I also just sort of like incidentally saw a ton of his movies because I feel like I sort of became a cinephile during his big prestige period with Mystic River and $1 Million Baby. I almost said Gone Baby Gone. That is a different director, a prestige actor
Yep.
turned director. But $1 Million Baby, Letters from Iwo Jima, and Flags of Our Fathers. That whole run was sort of like when I was becoming a big movie guy, and I realized I watched a lot of his sort of 21st century films just sort of on impulse because they were there. And it
Mm.
wasn't until a lot later that I kind of made a dedicated journey through Clint Eastwood stuff. I saw Unforgiven around that time too, and there's a couple of other kind of key ones, but I hadn't really seen anything from his Dollars trilogy up to like the 90s 2000s era. So just in the last like 5 years, I think it was actually like 2021 22, went and actually watched through all of Clint's directorial features. So I have seen all, I think it's 42 now is the number.
It's a
I've seen
lot.
all 42 of them, and I just watched them chronologically, which I don't know that I would totally recommend. There are a couple of really dark periods and tough ones to get through, especially his like early 80s.
Yeah.
But I did find a filmmaker and an artist that had significantly more on his mind than I think you would assume, given sort of some of like his prestige period, or like listening to him in interviews, or sort of the reputation he's sort of garnered within big circles of like Clint fandom. His politics, as you said, are kind of messy, but also occasionally to me more fascinating and more palatable than things that are purely sort of like right-wing art, or even like more like left or like liberal art, because of
Yeah.
their sort of
Yeah.
messiness and thorniness. And yeah, I've over the years really kind of fallen in love with Clint as a creator and as an artist, and think he has significantly more good movies than he has bad ones. I think I can count on one hand the number of movies he's directed that I would have apprehension about revisiting. And then like the other 35 plus are all ones that I either think are quite good, or at least interesting, all the way up to just sort of bona fide masterpieces in the kind of upper echelons of American films of whatever decade he was working in.
I may have become aware of Clint Eastwood because of Back to the Future 3. That's possible. It's the first time that I heard his name in that joke. I do remember in the late 80s, like on, Channel 56, like Dirty Harry movies and that sort of thing being played on, the Saturday night movie or whatever it was. But my sort of real introduction to him, I think, it's all around the same time, so it's really hard to say. But on the directing side, Unforgiven, and on the acting side, I think In the Line of Fire, which both movies I absolutely love. And Unforgiven might well be on my short list of like the greatest movies of all time. And the sort of like triple whammy of Unforgiven followed by A Perfect World, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. And then The Bridges of Madison County, which is the next movie in his oeuvre. I kind of like, I was aware of the rough and tumble Western sort of gritty, tough guy, Clint Eastwood, Dirty Harry. And then I was being exposed to these movies that had this incredible sort of like humanistic, complex studies of people, and was always fascinated by him, like for that reason, that to his politics, like he's a Republican conservative, but he's of a certain era of California Republican conservatives that don't exist anymore. There's kind of a pioneering libertarian spirit to it, but also a deep sense of like racial justice that's part of what underlies kind of his political bent, right? And I think we're even seeing that at the age of 95 in Juror number 2 as well, that there's this real wrestling with these ideas and the sense of injustice in the system and all that sort of thing. But yeah, I kind of took this moment to think about it and really look back on his directorial canon, and I'm like, oh, I think Clint Eastwood is like one of my maybe 5 favorite directors ever. There's just some like ridiculous movies in here that I absolutely think are as you say, masterpieces. I don't know that True Crime is one of them, but I was really interested. Like, there's a lot I love about this movie, and there's this essential kind of sense of Clint Eastwood and his like pursuit of justice in this movie that I think is really fascinating. So let's talk about True Crime. Again, he, as Aaron kind of alluded to, if you go through his directorial canon, there's a bunch of lulls, right? There's sort of like high points and low points, and the low points tend to last a few movies. And then the high points are really high, right? And this definitely was I think, the midst of a lull in his work. My issue with this movie is that it's about half an hour too long. And there's a bunch of stuff that I would have just cut out entirely and would have made it better. But what do you guys think? Had either of you seen it before this? I mean, Aaron, you obviously had, because you must have like gone through the
yes, I had.
But yeah, Julie, had you seen it?
I had not.
Okay, so what were your thoughts?
My first thought, which was just which is maybe something I do associate with Eastwood, and I think this might sound like a dig, but it's not. But that it's like a really well made, kind of, I don't want to say like well made B movie, but it's like a well made kind of like slightly old fashioned legal thriller. That it's like it's a type of genre film that is done really well by someone who can take that form and make something a little bit interesting out of it. So I felt invested in it. In a way, like it got to me the way those types of movies are supposed to get to you, I feel. In terms of just the suspense and the kind of rousing of your desire for justice, I guess, in terms of what the movie offers you. Yeah, too long probably. I think we do kind of lose sight of the Isaiah Washington's character's side of the story. In a way that is to the film's detriment. But I think the overall structure, with that kind of those back and forth parallels, I think are part of what makes the movie really strong, is having that, seeing both sides of the story, which like amps up the suspense, I think, of like, if when you're going back and cross-cutting back and forth between these two narrative strands, like I think that works really well. But yeah, we just seem to kind of go astray, and I don't think that all of sort of Ev's domestic problems and stuff like that, it definitely extraneous. And I don't.
The entire daughter storyline should have been cut. The entire thing.
Yeah.
I know we all agree on this. Like, I can tell we all agree on this, but yes.
I will push back only because then we would never get one of my favorite sequences in maybe the entirety of Clint's body of work, which is the absolutely baffling, tonally bizarre Speed Zoo sequence.
This is the problem. It is that sequence. And like, I agree that in a vacuum, the existence of that sequence is something beautiful and magical. But my God, like, what the fuck is it doing here? Yeah, man. Cut it. Put it in the director's cut. Put it as, like, this is what deleted scenes are for. This would have been one of the most beloved deleted scenes of all time, but wow, does it not belong here at all? And is it fucking weird? And what a choice. What a choice. But yeah, other than that, Aaron, what do you think? And also, I got to say, like, the moment where she falls out of the stroller or whatever, and like it's clearly a doll, and like it's just, oh God, the whole thing is truly awful.
I mean, I got to be honest, I sort of unironically love it. I have heard some very fun justifications of it from friends, and this is all total BS. But like the idea that it was sort of Clint's loving homage to a more European sensibility of filmmaking, given the French affinity for his work, which I'm like, hey, you know what? Anything that I can possibly find here to validate this very strange but sort of uncomfortably, like, I don't know, transcendent moment in the middle. Anyway, it's I will not try to justify it to you all. If you hate it, absolutely, by all means, hate it.
I buy that idea, though. I mean, it's a very French scene.
It is indeed. It is extremely French.
We'll give it that.
Yeah, I mean, but I guess in terms of like my experience with true crime proper, it was it was a really nice and pleasant surprise for me to enjoy this movie as much as I did when I watched it, because I had, I guess just, a handful of days earlier, maybe like a week earlier, like finished The Bridges of Madison County, which I had put
Mhm.
off for a long time. And wow, what a movie. Probably to
Yeah.
date, like if you ask me today, like it would be my favorite Clint Eastwood movie. But A Perfect World is very much up there too. I think they're both just beautiful, wonderful American masterpieces. And I had finished that, and I realized, with the exception of Space Cowboys, the next one that I had seen kind of in order was Mystic River, which, despite its popularity with the awards scene, I do not like very much. I think it's a pretty kind of slapdash work. I think Sean Penn is deeply overacting in it. It's just not my favorite of his movies. So I was curious, like, what The Bridge felt like and looked like, and whether or not I was going to enjoy it, because to me, Bridges to Mystic River is quite the drop off. And lo and behold, I found myself actually enjoying Absolute Power. I really enjoy Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil for what it is, something that I was not anticipating. And True Crime ended up surprising me too. It was one of those. Am I allowed to curse on here?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Perfect. I mean, I don't need to. It's not a mandatory thing, but through this period, I was sort of like watching back to back to back and thinking about like Gordon Ramsay and being like, oh yes, some good fucking food here, like that I was not expecting finally. Something, because we're entering into dark territory. And yeah, I guess, when I saw it, I was just really interested in stuff that comes up in Clint movies a lot. His racial politics are something very interesting to mine and to discuss, because he grew up in Bay Area. He was from like little suburban enclaves here in the East Bay, and then moved himself to Oakland literally because he thought that where he was growing up was too white and too like stodgy, and wanted to be around a more culturally diverse group of people, and really liked jazz and wanted to go play like piano in the clubs and things like that. So he's this weird like contradiction of a guy in some ways, and you see a lot of those predilections and fascinations of his pop up in his work in compelling ways. And this one, I think, is no different. Like he gets at some very interesting things with regard to the justice system, yes, but also I think in this like cultural and media representation and sort of narrativizing of brutality, specifically brutality against like young white women, and how that is sort of broadly seen and viewed, and the kind of barbarism that erupts from these feelings of like retribution that they kind of call to the surface. And yeah, I think that you're right. Like, a lot of the domestic stuff is very silly, although that back and forth scene of Clint and James Wood just like riffing with each other is just a joy and a pleasure to watch. Like, they're having a great time. So it's a mixed bag. It's not like something that I think has a lot of tonal control, but its highs are high, and I think supersede the lows of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's it really does feel a lot like a journalism movie. Like, it's not just about the attempt to get this one man out of prison, but to about how it's like about how journalism gets made, and what counts, and is how much is journalism in pursuit of the truth, right? Which is you know uh, a lot of that comes out with him and James Woods in their kind of battle over how are they going to tell this story, and their back and forth. Um, and you have Dennis Leary in there, so there's a lot of like hotshot wisecracking, moments about reporting and working with reporters, and you even have some sort of like all the president's men's esque moments where you're doing these walk and
Yeah.
talks, and you're panning around the office and all that stuff.
Mhm.
And I know, like, for me, it's just like there's something interesting about Clint Eastwood in search of justice, but he's not either a cowboy or a cop.
And he's a little like indifferent as well. Like he's also like morally ambiguous, right? Which I think is, but like the only thing that he cares about is justice, right? Or like not letting the system sort of like take over the narrative, right? His whole sort of moral compass in this movie I found really interesting, and I also think this is a very like funny performance. Like I it's not often that we get Clint Eastwood in a very like almost kind of lighthearted performance where he gets to actually be quite funny. And I do love those occasional times when you can just see Clint Eastwood like having a good time with a character. I didn't love the writing of this movie. I liked a lot of the dialogue in those kind of, more sort of David Mamet-y kind of scenes, right? Between him and Woods and Leary and so on and so forth. I like the more sort of salty moments, and I think they're a lot of fun. I think a lot of the expository dialogue is really clumsy, and I think a lot of the pacing's really clumsy, and the tone's really clumsy, and all that sort of thing. But I did like this character a lot, and I kind of wanted to see the character do more stuff. I just sort of, I felt sometimes a lot of the plot points were kind of betraying the character, because you're right, this is like a good journalism movie, but then it ends with this ridiculous like race against time against the lethal injection machine, and I'm like, this is just like, this belongs somewhere else. It's kind of weird and farcical. It doesn't make any logical sense, and it's also just like very morbid in the way that it's like it's trying to build tension with someone's execution by lethal injection. I'm like, I'm not sure that's appropriate way of doing that. It might work well for a kind of pop boiler sort of book, but I'm not sure that it works well for this movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like the timeline is preposterous, right? The fact that you could go down to the wire and go to some awful. I mean, it's set in California, so I guess maybe it makes it more likely that a governor would actually be inclined to clemency or exoneration. But like, it ain't happening the day of,
Yeah.
Moment of.
Yeah.
Jury.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, part of it felt very morbid in the sense of like the way it's all building up, and like they're testing the equipment. They're, like you go through all these scenes as the people at the prison, not just Isaiah Washington, but like also the people who work there, and the Michael McKean as the sleazy priest or whatever denomination he's meant to be. Like, it is very morbid. It is very, like perhaps not to everyone's taste, let's say. But I think it is very effective in a way, in a kind of, B-movie drama kind of way.
Yeah, like some of the stuff in the film that I guess like feels a little bit morbid to me might be incidental. Like I do think the sort of like ticking time bomb situation at the end is just one, it's not that interesting because at a certain point we kind of know where the narrative's going once the pieces fall into place, and Eastwood's character is like rushing to save Isaiah Washington's character, as the clock is racing down. But I also do think like this is a thing that becomes more apparent, I think, even in Clint's later period. I'm always interested in what he chooses to fixate on, because his impulses are not those of a different kind of director. I think specifically of one that is just maybe like one of the guiltiest things I've seen of him doing this type of thing, which is he in 1517 to Paris, which people have a lot of feelings about. I personally think it's a fascinating film, especially from someone like Clint Eastwood. But he dedicates like 10 minutes to just sort of like a three-way Zoom conference and the use of the technology and how it sort of individuates and isolates and abstracts like these different people and how they're communicating with one another, and sort of like the delays in the cadence of their conversation. And it does just seem like a filmmaker who is, in his late 80s and intrigued by newfangled things. In this movie, like all of that stuff that you're talking about, Julia, like the methodology of the killing, I think gives it this really unsettling sterility. Like all of it is just seen as calculus, and you are constantly sort of at war with yourself. And there's this sort of interesting tension in the movie of recognizing that we're talking about a life here, talking about ending a life, and also talking about all of these sort of postures and processes that are in place to sort of spiritually exonerate all the people involved, right? Everyone pushes the button at the same time, and it's automated and randomized, so no one person is responsible for it, and you can go home and sleep at night. And yet we're also seeing, we're seeing the vials get filled with literal poison. We're seeing them check the harnesses on this chair. We're seeing them check the phones, and all of it becomes just this labor of process that seeks to separate us from the reality of what this is. And I think that tension is very purposeful in the movie. That you're supposed to be sort of disgusted and repelled by the idea of us turning something as serious as ending a life into just like effectively like a business.
Yeah, I kept thinking during the sequences that you're talking about, I kept thinking about Dead Man Walking and the contrast between the way that process is depicted in Dead Man Walking versus here. And I think it's quite intentional, right? Where in Dead Man Walking, it's got this very sort of solemn and dark mood to it, whereas here it's very matter of fact. And I think that actually works in well for a part of the movie that I think is really interesting and underdeveloped, and maybe partly because it gets drowned out in all the extraneous stuff that I think shouldn't be there, which is the Bernard Hill character, and just the way that kind of the whole culture of the prison and the executioner and the warden are depicted, and that he's, Bernard Hill's character is kind of very sort of morally sort of neutral. He constantly kind of talks about it as like he's just doing what the state tells him to do. It's his job, and he tries to keep a kind of his emotions and his sort of moral convictions out of it. And the way that is also then depicted in the explanation of the way that the kill switch is anonymous, right, by design. And I think that's really interesting. Like, I think that there's a, if you kind of look at the movie as a sort of 3-part structure with the journalism story, and then the wrongfully accused story, and then the system story, that the way that Eastwood depicts the system is through a very different lens than I think we're used to in a movie like this. And I wanted kind of more of that, right? That, like, my frustration was that I loved that character and I wanted like more exploration there. And again, it may just because it's drowned out by other stuff that doesn't need to be there, but also that it may have been underwritten slightly. But I did find that pretty interesting. And it feels very like Clint Eastwood-y in that it shrugs its shoulders and says like, well, things are fucked.
Yeah. I like what you're saying about the Bernard Hill character too, who terrific character actor, love whenever he shows up in things. But there's, I mean, especially at the end of the movie, like when, the governor's phone starts ringing, there's this way that scene plays out, especially with Bernard Hill's character. Like, they were all just sitting there tensely waiting for an excuse to stop this. That they all had this like energy around it where they know what they're doing is wrong. They feel this sort of disgust in themselves and in this process. Like, there's no joy being had here or anything that feels like real justice to them. And when the phone rings and they get the call, like, they all jump to action as if they were just waiting to pounce, like, for any excuse to stop what was happening. And maybe some of that is a convenient fantasy of Hollywood and of Clint Eastwood's, that the men who would do this thing or make this sort of their profession would feel this way. But I do think it is again, an interesting tension that the film draws out. That's like, oh yeah, at the point that this actually occurs, no one in that room feels any sense of like moral certainty about this. This is not a thing that feels right to anybody when it happens.
Yeah, I like how he kind of hits both notes, right? That there is the central story of Frank and his family and what they're going through as they prepare for his what seems like his inevitable death. And then there are these kind of smaller moments about how this, not that it absolves them of anything, but that this whole, you know, sense of what justice is, this that the reality of the death penalty is something that damages everyone who's involved with it at some level or another.
Yeah.
You know, it's like a poison that spreads. Uh, yeah, so I think the fact that you see both of those things really really makes the movie more interesting. I also kind of I'm also uh, wondering what you kind of thought, because I felt that there is this tension in the movie between uh what I forget which one of you said was like maybe like a fatalistic kind of um acceptance of the worst parts of the system, but then this like optimism that like uh almost like the woman on the train tracks, you know, like justice will be served even if it's at the very 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 last second, you know.
Yeah.
And having some faith in that system, because like I promise I won't get on a soapbox about all the like horrifyingly unjust executions that have happened, but you know, like it is really a fantasy that a governor would
Yep.
intervene in a death penalty case. For these things to get turned
Yep.
over is, you know, appallingly unlikely. So I wondered where you thought that put what that did to the effect of the movie, or like how you saw Eastwood's vision in the movie, that kind of tension.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, this is still very much a Hollywood picture, and it's based on a what seems to be kind of like a pretty like pulp kind of paperback novel of sorts, and it's going to end the way it's going to end. I think, you know, in talking about this alongside the other film from last year that we'll be discussing, Clint does really interesting things to rupture our expectations of what a movie that looks and feels like a sort of potboiler classic thriller can do, and what it ultimately exemplifies. But here in 1999, um, I think it only gets so far as to steal a phrase from the film itself, like a message story or a picture that is about something and still attempts to satisfy the narrative expectations of a mass audience and of its filmmaker as well, you know. So I guess that's all I really have to say about it. I don't know. It's an interesting thing, you know, like it almost does feel like the film and the story itself might be more rewarding, as perverse as it sounds, if it did end in his failure to stay the
Yeah.
execution.
Yeah.
That it would be sort of more of a valuable, like moralistic text if it was about the failures of the system, even as somebody discovers that there is someone innocent meeting a horrible fate like this. And I kind of feel like the Clint Eastwood of the 2010s or the 2020s might make a movie more like that.
Yeah, I think so. And there's certainly a cheapness to the plot device that the actual perpetrator was dead by the time, so that you
Yeah.
can't actually like work through that more complicated moral decision. You know, that puts you in more like a movie like Juror number 2, right? Where you have a much more complex decision about how to achieve justice. Yeah, I mean, I do think that, you know, I think this movie is pretty explicitly, it's not as explicitly anti-capital punishment as, say, Dead Man Walking is, or even A Time to Kill. But it is certainly a movie that I think, in a way that isn't as quite as moralizing as those two movies are, is showing why this can never work in a way that is actually like just and fair, because all of the sort of available data made this guy look very, very guilty. And I think that's intentional in the writing, right? But he wasn't. And so the chances that you end up executing somebody who is not guilty are very high. And of course, as we know, it happens with disturbing regularity, usually along these kind of racial lines. I also think, though, and I think this is worth mentioning, and I really hate I really hate that both Isaiah Washington and James Woods suck now as human beings. I got really mad watching this movie because I remembered how much I just love James Woods and how great he is here. But like, fuck that guy. But Isaiah Washington also just like is a shitty human being. But man, this performance is good. And I think the best thing about the movie, and also I just think the sort of, you know, vulnerability and sort of subtlety of this performance is really what gives it its emotional core, that with a less talented actor, that would make this storyline kind of fall apart. And it's the ability of him to show a certain amount of like guilt and a darker history, but also the conviction that he is innocent, but also that the system is probably going to let him down. And there's, you know, it's all very heartbreaking, but very, very well realized. And I think that's the biggest strength of this movie.
Yeah, I think he does a really terrific job. There's one scene in particular that I think of. It's when they're taking his daughter out of the cell, when the family's coming to visit, and he's like barely holding it together as he's saying goodbye to her and being strong. And as soon as she is out the door and it's shut behind her, he's like hyperventilating, like with just this intense terror and pain and grief and any number of emotions that he's just like wearing in this like staggered breath. It's really affecting what he's doing in the prison sequences in the movie. And you know, as we're talking about it sounds strange for a movie that we said is already like maybe a little bit too long in its current form, but it's a film that also feels like it's overly ambitious for what it is. Like, it is both trying to be anti-capital punishment and humanize someone on death row, and also be this sort of crime thriller, or I guess like legal thriller, I guess I'll call it, and having this person sort of journalistically go through and study the case, not unlike some of the stuff that happens in Juror number 2. But then it also wants to be about the failures of the justice system along the way. You know, like as he's uncovering all these things, what he's finding out is that every step along the way, everything was done with a sort of like presumption of guilt and a pretense that this person was going to be put away, and all of that defined because of their very tenuous history with the law, and because they are a black man, and because they were in this place at the wrong time, and because they didn't make the perfect decisions in a moment when they came across the body of the decedent. You know, like this, it all sort of turns into this much grander kind of tapestry of failures and intricacies and things that are going on here that the movie doesn't feel like it can sustain, while it's also doing the domestic drama of Clint like fighting with Dennis Leary about sleeping with his wife.
Yeah, the scene with the daughter and when she leaves, like as a parent, that fucking broke me. Like it was really, really hard, and really, really well acted because that felt really real and really raw. And I think, Aaron, like you hit the nail on the head, right? Like the movie as it exists, you could cut half an hour out of it and it would have been a better movie, but you could also add a different half hour to it and it would have, I think, achieved some of the ambition that it's trying to strive for. Yeah, it's frustrating when there's a movie like this that I think is actually like quite good, and there's a lot to recommend it, and it is really worth seeing for the things that are there, but also that it's so sort of blaringly obvious that there's a better movie here that just didn't get made, and like you really want it to, and you really want it to be there, but it's just not quite. And I think that when Clint Eastwood sort of misses, that's how he tends to miss, right? Is like over ambition, and then just like it's just not quite there. And sometimes it definitely is, and sometimes it you get Space Cowboys. So
yeah, not without its rewards, as I will say again.
No, it's a fun movie.
I adore the extremely virile Donald Sutherland, who is constantly betting women half his age. There's a lot of like fun little things in that movie.
There definitely are.
But like even in a movie like this, John, as you said, like there are these really fascinating formal flourishes that Clint does that are like, oh yeah, he's clearly got a lot on his mind here. And I think one of the very first ones that came to mind for me is when Everett is first assigned the case, because I think sort of gently alluded to the fact that he's taking on this sort of human interest angle piece, talking about this man on death row because a coworker of his, leaving a bar where she was spending time with Everett, crashes on Dead Man's Curve, a very dangerous curve in the rain, and she's killed in an auto accident. And as he's sort of like relaying his recollections of the case and what happened in the events, the movie cuts to what is sort of like a flashback, I guess, in a normal filmic formal sense. But what it actually is just the psyche and the presentation of the events as they stand on the record from the perspective of this man who's pretty ambivalent towards it, besides the fact that what he knows is like this man on death row killed a young pregnant girl in cold blood. And when he imagines it, Isaiah Washington plays it as such, and also the movie just presents it this way, as him being a much more vicious and like cold-blooded killer. Like, and everything we hear on the radio and in news footage that's playing on the TVs does everything it can to dehumanize Isaiah Washington's character. Like, there's a scene before we meet Michael Jeter's character, who has a wonderful name, Dale Porterhouse, one of the witnesses to the murder. He's one of the sole witnesses who came in and claims that he saw Isaiah Washington's character blood soaked and holding a gun. And when he's talking and being interviewed by the news correspondent, he says that he when he looked into his eyes, it was like looking into the eyes of a goat, just darkness. And there's all this like trying to like this like vilifying and like creating this sort of like monstrous caricature of this man. And all of that's very real, like it is the way that we talk about these sorts of incidents in the news. There was a very highly publicized one that happened just like a handful of weeks ago with the killing of Irina Zatruska in where was it, Charlotte, North Carolina. And it is a tragedy, and like a horrible way for somebody to die. I've seen the footage and probably should not have, but the way that it was publicized and latched onto by right-wing media was specifically in trying to the narrative was highly racialized, right? Like if you follow any of what was being said to its logical conclusion, all that it really came to was, we need to vilify, oppress, further police, and act in more violent ways against black men of any kind, like presume a sense of danger around them. And it like you see that on display here in the film, and it's, I don't know, it was a thing that immediately came to mind as I was watching. And again, for that to come out of a movie directed by the guy who is maybe most widely known by people of our generation for talking to an empty chair at a Republican National Convention, like I'm like, okay, this guy has layers to him, has nuance to his considerations, has like an actual like artistic perspective that's worth contending with.
That's why, I mean, like I don't know why I'm really interested in journalism movies, but like the that's like why I think the battles are so interesting and like so relevant, because the idea is like we don't we don't want to do investigative journalism anymore. You know, like that, like it's meant to be this kind of soppy, treacly human interest piece, whatever that means. And you know, there's just the James Woods character, I forget exactly what he says, but he says like the public interest is what we invent in order to sell a story about a kind of gory or grisly story or tawdry story. We use the cover of human interest to tell that story because it will sell.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and talking just to go back to what Aaron was saying, like something. Oh, I did want to mention like part of I just have to say it at one point or another, but the part of the one of the scenes in James Woods' office where he's like telling him to lay off and like not pursue this case as an actual investigation. He is when when Clint Eastwood tells him he thinks that Isaiah Washington's character is innocent, James Wood is like right about to take a bite out of a Snickers bar.
Yeah. That's a great moment.
And he's like, it's just like directly poised above his mouth.
Yeah.
And then they cut to, I don't know, it's a cross cut to some other, maybe to the prison or something else. But then they cut back and he has still yet to eat his Snickers bar. He's like,
it's a great role.
Which I thought was such a great little moment that's kind of incongruous with the rest of the movie. Really funny. But I do like, I do think what was really interesting when we talk about how Eastwood's politics might be more complicated than we might assume is like there is that whole speech by I forget what the man's name was who is the actual murderer who had subsequently died, but her saying that she's a grandmother, I think, actually. Mm-hmm. But she very explicitly calls this out, saying that like the police and the journalists don't come to a neighborhood to tell the stories about about Black murder victims, you know?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think like that sentiment was there in the 90s, you know, like it was a topic of discussion, you know, like I watch a lot of Law and Order, and if you watch the Law and Orders from the 90s, throughout the 90s, basically, like it's discussed, like, you know, you have characters saying to white cops, like, why do you only come down here when a white person is murdered? You know, so it's interesting that like that was an idea in our politics that just completely fizzled out in the 90s and didn't lead to anything until it got more, I mean, not that, you know, it's like we solved it now, but that it became more of a mobilizing political idea only much later on.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I'm not, it seems to say something about like where this film sits in like a cultural, in the moment of the 90s or the late 90s.
Yeah, I think that's it. That I mean, it's one of those things where it's hard to put yourself in that frame of mind watching it in the future, right? But yeah, I mean, to both of your points, I don't think a lot was happening in mainstream media to really expose the kind of racial inequities in the criminal justice system, especially with the capital punishment. Because of course, Dead Man Walking is about a poor, like, white guy who actually is guilty, right? Who is being executed, and I think the closest, you know, that you had was you know, Grisham has long been a, you know, anti-capital punishment sort of advocate, but you know, with Time to Kill, but even that is very. It's not pointing its finger at necessarily the criminal justice system. It's pointing its finger at systemic racism and the idea of like justified killing and all that sort of thing. And so the idea that you have a movie that's taking head on this fact, right, that the white savior only shows up when he happens to, you know, caught his interest, right? And she says, "Where were you when this tragedy happened?" And that's like, I do think that is something that I think we see a lot more in media now, that kind of storyline and exploring that element of our racist culture, but not at the end of the 90s. And that alone sort of makes this a pretty fascinating movie to watch. So should we then also should we talk about Juror number 2? Should we flash forward 25 years and
Can I just say
Yeah,
one
yeah,
last
go ahead.
thing about so the one thing we didn't the kind of questions of this place in the politics in the 90s and Eastwood politics is like has to do with sort of sex and feminism, and like there are these weird jokes thrown in that like aren't necessarily adding anything about like him talking either to his female or male colleagues about women in the workplace now, like like what are you going to do? Ladies are going to be ladies in the workplace, and kind of a joking about the topic of women in the workplace as if something that's been solved already, and so we can now make fun of it. Was like that was just this interesting thread that went through it that I thought was sort of noteworthy as a film being a product of this time and Clint Eastwood at this time.
Well, even the whole Mary McCormick character and the aftermath of it, right, is sort of part of that. Yeah. I do like it's so weird, but the character who like covers trends now, and so she's always like, increasingly people are asking that you not smoke in the workplace. And, it's like it's becoming more and more common among the American worker, or like when she's like, it is now okay for women to get coffee from men because more and more women are like, it's a bizarre character, but like it worked for me. It was very funny. I like that. I like that moment. I'm going to say outright that if you have not seen Juror number 2 yet, I would recommend skipping this part and going to the end, because I didn't really know what this movie was about. And when I found out, I was like, okay, wow.
Me neither. Yeah.
So what the movie will sort of tell you in its description is that a juror on a murder trial has a sort of crisis of conscience and is like a holdout for the other jurors. But what it doesn't tell you, and this is where the spoiler is, so again, skip to the end. You find out very early that the juror in question is responsible for the death in question, which makes it a very interesting morality play. I loved this movie. I have some issues with it as well. Minor gripes here and there, mostly to do with the way that the legal system or sort of trials are sometimes depicted in Hollywood. But it is perfectly cast. It is so like pitch perfectly told in its pacing. And one of my youngest daughters watched some of it here and there with me, including the last 10 minutes or so. And then when the credits rolled, she was like, wait, what? There's not more? And I'm like, no, honey, that's like how movies for grown-ups end, with moral ambiguity. And we don't know what's happening. So I had not seen this until I watched it today. And wow, for a 95-year-old, or even for not a 95-year-old, like, what a movie.
Yeah, I'm glad that you finally got the chance to watch it. Julia, was this also your first time watching it?
No, I had seen it. I saw it maybe a year ago, or whenever it came onto HBO.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was just when I first caught it.
I think it was like November of last year. It was pretty recent. Yeah, so like close to a year ago. Yeah.
But I was in the same boat that John was in, and that I knew nothing about it. And then you find out that he's on the jury for the crime he actually committed. And I was like, oh my God, it was a real gasp kind of moment. We're talking about the Sixth Sense and talking about twists and, waiting for plot twists or knowing plot twists in advance and stuff like that. And this was an amazing, amazing conceit for me.
Mm-hmm.
I think and just the way it's you discover it, right? Where it looks like he's piecing it together as he's getting the details from the crime, about the crime in the opening statements. It's just so perfectly constructed, and Nicholas Hoult, as he's the way he like gradually comes to understand what actually happened and how he's responsible, like as you just see that the blocks come together in his face and he gets more and more horrified. Yeah, it's it kicks off the movie perfectly, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a really special film. As you said, like coming from a guy who is 95 years old and still making films of this caliber, this complexity. And I kind of alluded to this already, but one of the things that I absolutely love about it is how it sort of adopts a lot of Clint's late period considerations and some of the ways that his ideology and perspective has
Yeah.
evolved in his later age, and puts it in this very handsome, very palatable, like throwback thriller formula. It looks and feels, I mean, a lot of the conversation around this movie when it came out was just, that sort of maybe it's a canard, but at least like, like this recurrent thing that we say, we're saying, well, hey, they don't make them like this anymore. And I kind of agree, like it does sort of present itself as a very sort of throwback, old school 90s style, early 2000s style legal thriller. But its propositions and its conclusions are far thornier than
Mm-hmm.
that. And what it has to say specifically about not just the justice system, but I think ultimately like something deeper and more systemic about the American ideal of some of what Clint was into, with things going all the way back to like Josie Wales, this sort of like mandate of homesteading and producing a family and the responsibilities to a family and how those can be perverted. It is something on this film's mind as well that I think really leaves a fascinatingly bitter taste in your mouth for something that plays as and goes down as smoothly as this movie does for about 2 hours.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of the opinion, and I said this in our last episode, that Toni Collette is one of the best actors on the planet, and I would say the same thing about Nicholas Hoult, who I just think is, I mean, his Oscar is like waiting to be collected at some point for something, but
yeah.
And like what a performance this is. What I found, especially watching these sort of roughly back to back, right, within a sort of a few days of each other, it does feel like a sort of companion piece to true crime in some interesting ways. And that they are both dealing with the same basic topic. But again, the cultural expectations, what can be depicted, how things have actually changed in terms of racial politics and that sort of thing in the last 25 years. What I found really compelling about this movie is that the guy on trial is white, the main character is white, most of the main players are white. The way that the black characters function, and I also want to talk about the way that true crime podcasts function in this movie too. I think that's really interesting, but I'll come back to that in a second. The way the black characters function is a really, and I don't think you see this a lot, right, is instead of the black characters being the ones who are specifically being shafted by the system here, there's a message of racism is bad for all of us for a lot of reasons. And one of them is the way in which their conclusion about this guy being just sort of bad and fuck him, there's a sort of understandable, like the one who's like, I got to get back to my kids. And there's this sense that she's like working paycheck to paycheck, being a single mom. And so I don't have time for this fucking asshole white guy who may or may not have murdered somebody, but who cares? The system doesn't care about me. Right. And then Cedric Yarbo's character, which is also just a fascinating sort of portrait, right, of someone who like knows that maybe he's got it wrong, but he does not give a fuck. And like, and this side of the kind of racial imbalance in the system, right? Sort of from the jury end of it, I think is also really fascinating. Instead of just saying, instead of just the Isaiah Washington character who's getting the sort of the real end of the shaft here, right? The way that those inequities function and bleed throughout the system, I think is just I don't think I've seen that before in quite as empathetic and compelling a depiction.
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe the only time that I've ever heard someone say the words you said, John, and I also agree with it, and it doesn't feel complicated by saying, thank goodness both of the main characters on either side of this trial are white.
Mm-hmm.
But in this movie, like it does mean something,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Yeah.
And that they're both men who identify with one another, I think, or at least Holt identifies with this man who is on trial here, the defendant, and they have these sort of checkered pasts, not unlike Isaiah Washington's character. And a lot of the movie is informed by this idea of somebody being presumed guilty or being a bad defendant, or somebody who's easy for us to sort of crucify because of all of the things on their record, because of their past behavior, because of the ways that we sort of institutionalize this idea that nobody can be rehabilitated or change. And I think that that's a really compelling idea that juror number 2 plays with, that true crime has there too, sort of on the surface, but that goes even deeper here of like, we ostensibly have a justice system that believes in corrective measures and rehabilitation and a means by which people can change and evolve and move on with their lives. But most of these structures actually are there to do the exact opposite of that, and are often there and built around an affirmation of an idea that is not actually something that is possible
Mm-hmm.
within the grand scheme
Mm-hmm.
of things.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about everything you all just said, but yeah, I think it's right. We have a similar moment that explicitly calls out the the abuses of the criminal justice system against, in this case specifically, Black people. Right when Cedric Yarborough's character is asked if he's ever been abusive in a relationship, and he just fires
Mm-hmm.
back, "Are you going to ask every member of the panel that?"
Yep.
And that is, I think, like I see a direct line from that to true crime.
Yeah.
But there's a lot. I mean, as a true crime person, like I know, like you just like it's like not, it's beyond implausible that the criminal justice system would admit fault and try and it could redress its errors in any way, that it would ever admit to making a mistake is highly implausible, right? Because the system exists to protect itself, right? And so right, I think true crime is more right, it's a little more I don't want to say the unrealistic, or it's more optimistic in its view of the system, that like even if the system is rotten in a lot of ways and can make errors, it still will listen and it will correct itself, even if it's just only in the nick of time. And then right, it's like he kind of wants to believe that it might, through Toni Collette's character, who plays the district attorney, and like obviously in real life a district attorney would never re-look at a case to see if they'd made a mistake, right? But that we get a much darker sense of the pressures that she is under, and the we are, I think, meant to, and I think Toni Collette definitely communicates that she is a person of who has a moral compass, right, and who is driven by noble instincts, right, but that she is under this pressure to win her election campaign. And, there's maybe a sense in which she's just right. And this, I think, is really, really interesting because it talking about like white women's place in the criminal justice system is that like often a white woman's interest or stakes in a criminal investigation or trial is that her duty is to protect other women, right? And that's made very explicitly clear here that like when Toni Collette is running and she makes that a huge part of her campaign, they did that I'm here to protect other women, and if I win this case that is like that can kind of be made I can turn this case into a parable about domestic abuse.
Yeah.
And turn that into me being able to spin my role as a protector of white women. And that's what my role is in the criminal justice system. And the idea that she to extent believes in, but also kind of needs that narrative in order for her to be successful politically and professionally. And the idea that that really pulls at her, and that really makes it hard for things to move in the right direction and for her to reconsider her actions. And because at the end of the film, it seems like he's gotten away with it, but the last moment of the film is her showing up at his doorstep, right? And that's the like end of the movie. Like, we don't know what will happen. And like, I think what part, like it's, I forget exactly how you put it, Aaron, you put it more eloquently, but like, this is a fucking dark movie.
Yeah.
And so like, she's had the change of heart. The individual wants to do the right thing, but there's like, we're not left feeling like there's any guarantee at all that if she does this, justice will be served and an innocent man will be freed. Like, this movie has done very little to make us believe that that would be a possible outcome. So in terms of like gender and race and the individual versus the system, I think like this is a more complex movie, but is still very much connected to true crime.
Yeah. Like one of the really interesting things about this movie is that there is one of the questions at its heart is like, is anybody really guilty here? Because like, what his character did was totally understandable. And like, you thought you hit a deer as a deer crossing. It's like blinding rain. He wasn't actually drunk. He was slightly distracted by his cell phone, but like, I don't know, pretty normal, right? Like is he really guilty for killing her? And then that our system is not equipped for that. We absolutely need a reason and a person to blame for every sort of, minor thing that goes wrong in society, right? I think a lot of MAGA is kind of built on that sense of like, retributive justice or whatever. But I also like, one of the things I just really loved is the way that it is just very smart and not sort of overbearing in the way it's dealing with like a lot of like the way that J.K. Simmons' character gets replaced by a true crime podcast fan is kind of an interesting metaphor in and of itself because he's a former cop. But I laughed out loud at the Dateline joke, by the way. I thought that was very funny, where he's like, "You're just a podcast fan?" She's like, "No, I also watch Dateline." But
podcasts tend to be better than Dateline.
They do. But what I think is really fascinating about that is that like what it suggests, because she's right, and she's the one who's able to see the faults in the system, it does suggest something like really kind of good and sort of empathy building about the whole true crime podcast phenomenon, while also casting her as being kind of out of her depth as someone who like thinks she's an expert when she's really not. And in a very like limited amount of space, it really does create a very interesting commentary about, and not a black and white commentary about, what this kind of obsession with true crime does, where she's like, rule number 1, it's always the spouse. Rule number 2, it's always like that. I forget what she says, right? But like, it's like, okay, yeah, but you're actually kind of right here, and you've reached the right conclusions, but there's also something troubling about the fact that you're not actually an expert, and we need to figure out how to like weigh those things, right? Without sort of bringing that down with a hammer. It's just a really well written sort of minor character and sequence that says quite a lot, I think, about the way that we the media phenomenon that crime is, and the role that plays, right, in a lot of these cases.
If you were on trial for murder,
Yeah.
who would you rather have on your jury? An ex-cop or a true crime podcast fan?
God, a true crime podcaster, I think. Like, yeah, I mean, for sure, right? Like, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, they're both. I guess it depends on the cop. I mean, like they make
Well, it
J.K.
does depend on
Simmons'
the
character
cop.
like a very like upstanding and like reasonable guy.
Yeah,
You know, like
yeah.
he's very systematic about his inquiries. He did it for a long time. He wants to be sure. He wants to get the evidence. But that has not always been my personal and anecdotal experience with cops who tend to be
Right. Hence
suspicious
my
of just
answer.
about everything, and trying to scope out danger around every corner. But likewise, I think part of the film's commentary is that like we've all sort of been trained to become that in the era of like true crime and in this like hyper individuated like late capitalist experience that we're all in, where it's like and I think this extends out to like one of the film's like thorniest propositions too about family, which is that like everybody has been socialized to be hyper suspicious of everybody and to presume a level of stasis in our positions, in our stations, and also that we always have the worst intentions in mind, and that everyone's dangerous
Yeah.
to a certain extent. And like that sense is something that feeds this really like reactionary and conservative like reifying of the family unit and the protection of and perpetuation of that family unit as like the ultimate end all be all goal of specifically like masculinity, I guess, but really just of like the American individual in general. And the movie weaponizes that against us. It wants us to find deep sympathy with Holt's character and all the reasons that he doesn't want to go to jail, which are sound. He doesn't. I mean, jail does not sound like a pleasant place, and he also has a wife and a family, and he also has a kid on the way. But he has this almost sort of like religious, spiritual belief in his transcendence and his capacity for change and his evolution as a human being, partly brought on by his wife, right? Someone who was there for him in his time when he was recovering as an alcoholic. And he has to both believe in that for himself and also reject that argument on behalf of Scythe, on behalf of the defendant, in order to sort of like damn him to a position that is really his to take, in terms of like the guilt of this whole situation. And I think the film is really fascinating in the way that it sort of questions this idea of like how we all weaponize the family structure, how we all sort of weaponize this ideal to our own ends, and often as ways to condemn or reject it on behalf of other people who we see in our society.
Yeah. If I have a issue with this movie, and I think the one that sort of is glaringly obvious to me, is that as meticulous as it is and as careful as it is and as nuanced as it is and as sort of morally sort of vulnerable as it is. In fact, one thing that we haven't even mentioned is the role that Kiefer Sutherland plays, where he is both the AA leader, but also the guy who's like, oh, don't turn yourself in, that'll be bad for you. Like, lot going on there, right?
Yeah, no
That could
kidding.
be its whole separate conversation. I do think that my problem with it is that I do not believe this trial would ever have taken place. I don't even see enough for a grand jury to indict this guy, honestly. The evidence is non-existent against him. And I understand, like, I do know that, right, like there's emotions and people get railroaded and all that sort of thing. We just had a very high profile case in my state that has echoes of this story. And
Are you
someone,
talking about Karen Reed?
I am indeed. But I just do not believe that with zero evidence, that it would ever. Well, it might get a grand jury indictment, but I just can't see a jury being like, I have no doubt. Like, yeah, you do. I mean, come on. Like, there's literally no evidence this guy did this. Reasonable doubts all over the place. And so, like, I understand that for the story the movie's trying to tell, you kind of have to swallow that. But I had a hard time swallowing that initially. I'm like, come on, guys. Like,
Are you saying he was overcharged, as they said of
yes, indeed.
Karen Reed in Boston?
Yeah.
This did actually make me think of the Karen Reed, or True Crime made me think of the Karen Reed case in Clint Eastwood, and that like true crime is actually kind of more interesting than it gets credit for, especially in this era, in that it brings together some strange bedfellows, really, that like this that there is actually a significant movement and solidarity about criminal justice reform that in the case of who became very involved in the Karen Reed case, right, it was a lot of these like wine moms wearing pink, and then it was also this like brash libertarian blogger,
Turtle Boy.
who,
I know
Turtle
him
Boy,
well.
right?
Mhm.
So like there is actually a sense of more people than you expect and more different people than you might expect are interested in criminal justice reform and have deep reservations about the
Sure.
criminal justice system.
Yeah.
And like that's where in sort of True Crime I felt like Eastwood's libertarian sensibilities are really on show in that movie, I think, in ways that in ways that are explicitly critical of the excesses of the criminal justice system.
Yeah, the representation of the trial in this, John, to your point, is very schematic. It's very convenient and neat for the purposes of the movie. I was actually thinking, I'll name drop a friend of the show, Peter Raleigh, who wrote a really good piece on Juror number 2 at the beginning of this year, relating it actually in theme to M. Night Shyamalan's Trap. I think there's a lot of connective tissue between those two, specifically about what they have to say about the family unit, about fatherhood, and again this idea that I kind of posited about sort of like the weaponization of that as like the end all be all of our ideal, and sort of the barbarism that it can hide just behind these ideas of family. But in doing that kind of work of connecting the two, I sort of see the trial in Juror number 2 a lot like I see the pop concert in Trap, where it's like, this is not a real space that we're operating within necessarily. It's more of like a sort of theatrical, cinematized version of this space. And I mean, Clint obviously goes doesn't quite go to the lengths that Shyamalan does to create this kind of expressionistic and interesting sort of surreal tenor to it. He's not that kind of filmmaker at all. He's a little bit more erudite. But I give it some grace, because it's also like, you work with what you were given. You're 95 years old, and still like there's a lot of interesting textures to this, even if it wouldn't ever really play out this way in real life.
Yeah, and I think it's true of a lot of fiction in any media about the criminal justice system and in lawyers and trials in particular, right? Like
It's hard to fictionalize, honestly. It just is, because there's so many unexpected turns that
and just like I was watching Law and Order for 5 years before I was like, wait, no, people don't take the stand in their own defense trials at all. Like they
Yeah.
never do.
Right. Yes. Right.
They don't just get up there and confess if Sam Waterston pokes you enough, like
I would.
there's a lot of lots of stuff about crimes and trials is highly fictionalized or highly implausible.
Yeah.
But it's just is done to make a good story or to simplify things. Because if you this is something you will also learn if you are into true crime, is that a lot of trials are just extremely long and boring.
Sure.
Like a lot of it is just procedure and the system doing what the system has to do, and it's not
A lot of videos.
It's not. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not. So I think it's like I think it's easily forgivable because it just kind of comes with the territory.
Well, it is forgivable because the movie is so good. I mean, like that's ultimately that's what it comes down to. Like it is so noble in what it's doing and so just like beautifully realized that I forgive all that stuff. But I was like, first of all, courtrooms don't look like that. They look like fucking, like conference rooms, whatever. Like this elegant, like, beautifully carved, like mahogany whatever. That's not real. But the other one where I was like, seriously, you have the defendant on the stand and you ask him one question. Like, no prosecutor would ever have done that in a million fucking years. She's like, no further questions, Your Honor. No. If you get the defendant on the stand, the whole point is you get to just like grill them for hours and hours and hours. And I kind of rolled my eyes at that moment too. But like those are the worst crimes this movie commits, and it's just so good that it doesn't matter. But it's still, if you do kind of know how the actual criminal justice system works, like those kind of things are like, okay, this is a little bit like a little absurd. It might rub you the wrong way, but don't let that dissuade you from seeing it.
No, not at all. This is just an aside and maybe a question for the panel here. So like, I kind of think of, and this movie, Juror Number 2, is very much kind of in the vein of like a John Grisham type story. And, John Grisham, I know, was involved in some capacity in the justice system and had sort of like a background in that, as I recall. But his stories are heavily dramatized and often fictionalized for the purposes of succinctness, and also probably because like your general sort of like reader amongst the hoi polloi like doesn't understand some of the intricacies of like legal pretense and things like that. But I guess I sort of see Grisham as like Grisham to like courtroom thrillers as like Ian Fleming is to spy thrillers. But there's also like, like there's also like John Le Carre who is more interested in kind of like the, sort of smoke filled, more kind of schematic, maybe kind of dry, like bureaucracy of spycraft. And those stories are really interesting to me. Is there a John Le Carre of like legal and courtroom thrillers? Like, is there someone who's like way more like into the sort of like fine jargon and legal like stuff that someone could pursue?
The name that sort of, I don't know, sticks out to me is Scott Turow.
Okay.
Like that's the first person I can really kind of think of who's more interested in, because you're right that John Grisham has morality on his mind, right? And that he is making these sort of very kind of bold statements about, inequality and unfairness and corruption and all this sort of thing, but in a way where he's trying to talk about human morality more than really he is the legal system. And I think that's just sort of who he is as a person.
Yeah.
Scott Turow is someone who I think is more interested in sort of the getting under the hood of of the legal crime drama, I guess. In my experience, and like presumed innocent and that sort of thing, and less interested in making these sort of broad sort of grand moral gestures. But it's a good question. I mean, I don't read a ton of crime fiction, so I'm not really sure. But that, like when you said John Le Carre, like that's who I thought of to kind of answer that question. I don't know, Julie, you got any other names? Shakespeare? I don't know.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but I kind of had this inkling that it might be somebody British. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe I'm just stupidly saying that because you brought up Le Carré, but that like, you know, like the it seems like a more British sensibility to be into the am I just thinking of Rumpole of the Bailey? Is that what
I think
I'm
you
doing?
are. Yeah.
Maybe.
Very-
Maybe. I think Scott Turow is a good answer though. You know, like I mean, in the world of Pecula, like Presumed Innocent is
Yeah.
very much a smarter movie than The Pelican Brief is. And so, you know,
Yeah.
if you're looking at those two and comparing them, I would absolutely say like, oh, that is something maybe worth pursuing and checking out. I'll have to do that and report back.
Let's wrap this up. True Crime is available on demand for like $5 if you want to rent it, and it's worthwhile watching if you haven't. The Juror number 2 is available on HBO Max, so if you are a subscriber, you can watch it for free, and you should do so at your earliest convenience, and then go back and listen to everything that we just said, which was very smart. That was super interesting, guys. Thank you. Julia, take it away.
Aaron, do you have a favorite movie from 1999? Oh, the face.
And why is it The Insider?
Okay. Well, now we're done, right? You said it for me.
Yeah.
I have so many favorite films from 1999. Of course, it's the reason you do this podcast, right? There are just so many brilliant works from that era. I guess there are maybe ones that I return to more often, but I feel like I have to go off the beaten path here a little bit, just a little bit, and shout out one that gets a little bit less love than some of the others, which is Johnny To's 1999 film The Mission. Has anyone mentioned this one on the podcast before? Okay.
No.
It's every bit a Johnny To film. It is about brotherhood and, you know, men of crime and all these fun things, but his normal guys are in it. I mean, Anthony Wong is here, Lam Suet, Roy Chung, but it's a very brisk, like 88 minutes, and it has this sort of like, I want to say 40 quality to it, much as that's just sort of like a buzzword, but it really does have like some of the consideration. Like I watch this movie and I feel some of the same things in it that I do when I watch My Darling Clementine, and the way that it reckons with sort of these men of disparate backgrounds and means coming together and clashing, but also finding some sort of connection with one another. And there is a absolutely transcendent, incredible, revelatory scene of all of these men wordlessly sitting in an office waiting to get reamed by their employer, a crime boss who they're, you know, being paid to protect, and they are just all kicking around back and forth amongst themselves a rolled up ball of paper. That is one of the most joyous things that I have ever seen in a movie. It is very, very special. I love it. The Mission, it's called. I'm sure you can find it fairly easily now. I think it was part of like all the recent like Johnny To kind of like restos and re-releases. I think it's available on Prime Video right now to rent if you're looking for it.
Yeah, you can rent it for $3 on
Great.
Prime Video. Seeing that right now, and I've been like looking over it as you've been talking, and there is like a certain Michael Mann energy that is emerging from just like what I'm seeing visually.
Absolutely.
Some of these,
yeah,
and some of these shots as well, and also just like the themes of the movie. So yeah, wow, I gotta watch that one. Okay, good answer.
And secondly, do you have a favorite film of all time?
I knew you were going to ask that question. I knew it was coming, and I'm still just mortified by the possibility of coming up with an answer.
So a couple things real quick. You can
Okay.
break the rules. You can give us 3. It doesn't really matter. It is a conversation piece more than anything else. What we tend to say is like, imagine you were cornered at a dinner party and needed to get out of the conversation. Like, what is the thing that you would pull out of your back pocket as your answer to that question.
Sure. Yeah. I guess I'll give my like more esoteric one, but still one that now for the first time in decades is as widely available as it's ever been. And it's also a 90s film. I guess it's easy because it's top of mind and it's by one of my favorite filmmakers, who is the Taiwanese master Edward Yang, who's no longer with us. But two of his 90s features, A Confusion and Mahjong, just got restorations in the last few years and are now available on a Blu-ray disc from Criterion Collection. The latter of those, his 1996 film Mahjong, I think is one of the finest films of the 90s, the one that I go to when people ask me just for my favorite film of the decade, pretty easily. And also, I think my favorite of his films, if you ask me today, and him being my favorite filmmaker, it's kind of easy to go to that one. It has a lot of his normal predilections, his normal fixations with the idea of like a rapidly evolving and rapidly expanding, globalizing Taiwan, amidst some of his crime thriller, or not even crime thriller, but just like, this sort of like underbelly of the city, told through these wayward youths who are just sort of never do wells, who are all living together in sort of squalor and figuring their way out around this world. But there's a like kidnapping subplot in it, like a crime subplot. There is the sort of, I won't call it a cameo. It really is just like a supporting performance from the French actress Virginie Leroyen in it, who is excellent. But it just adds to that kind of quality of Taipei quickly becoming this world of everybody and anybody. Lots of English speakers and French speakers and Cantonese speakers abound. And I just think it's one of the most gorgeous movies ever made. So Mahjong, it would be my pick for a favorite movie today.
I saw Confusion like when it came out, and remember really loving that. I actually didn't realize that he had died almost 20 years ago. Like,
yeah,
that's what is it, like a heart attack? 59. That's
I believe it was I want to say pancreatic cancer. I can't remember what kind of cancer, but yeah, I mean, he was very, very young. And his last film was 2000's Yi Yi, which I think, it kicked off the 21st century, and everyone has just been trying to catch up with it ever since. Because it really is that beautiful and just like endlessly rewarding as a film. So sometimes I go down a rabbit hole of just imagining what a Yang movie would look like today if he were still alive and making them, because certainly he would probably still be making them if he was in good health. And I can't even imagine. After Yi Yi where you go, and I guess we'll never really know.
Well, that's a bummer, but I mean, not your pick, but that is a bummer. But no, two really great choices. So thanks, guys. This was really fun. It's a lot to talk about here, but I love talking about Clint Eastwood, as it turns out, and don't get a ton of chances to do that. Also, y'all, if you have not seen A Perfect World, go see that, because one of my favorites. Aaron, where can people find you and the podcast and whatever else is on the internet that you're involved with that you want to put out into the world?
Sure. Again, the podcast is called Hit Factory. We are wherever you stream your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, or any of the other slightly smaller ones. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/hitfactorypod. That has our bi-weekly bonus content, and it's where we feature a lot of our conversations about new films, not just films of the 1990s. We're talking about a lot of movies that are more contemporary in there, and our takes on those. And in terms of socials, you can follow along with the show at Hit Factory Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky.
Julia, thank you. Aaron, thank you. You can find us at 1999 the podcast on Blue Sky. You can find us both by our names at Blue Sky. You can email us at 1999@cageclub.me. You can find other good shows about popular culture at cageclub.me. We will be back in a couple weeks. And until then, I don't like the new sign off. I want to think of a new one. I see dead people. I don't know, Julia.
Can I put in a last word?
Yeah.
Especially if you live in a war-ravaged, war-torn
Portland
city.
Yeah.
Very important for you to do your jury service.
Yeah, do that.
So no ham sandwiches or get indicted. So
until next time, do your duty service. Do your jury. It's like saying rural juror. Do your jury duty service. And we'll see.
Finally, someone let me out of my cage. Now, time for me is nothing cause I'm counting no A's. Nah, I couldn't be there. Nah, you shouldn't be scared. I'm good at repairs and I'm under each snare. Intangible. Bet you didn't think, so I command you to. Panoramic view. Look, I'll make it all manageable. Pick and choose, sit and lose. All you different crews, chicks and dudes who you think is really kicking tunes. Picture you getting down in a picture tube. Like you lit the fuse. You think it's fictional, mystical, maybe. Spiritual hero who appears in you to clear your view when you're too crazy. Lifeless to those, the definition for what life is. Priceless to you because I put you on the hype shit. You like it? Gun smoke, you're righteous with one toke. You're psychic among those possess you with one.